All right, what's going on, everyone? Today we've got a speech from an IDF officer that may have landed him in some hot water. Netanyahu says that Israel will win the war in Gaza, but at the same time, a new assessment from the U.S. intelligence community says that Israel will likely be fighting Hamas in Gaza for years to come. And we've got a roll-up of Israeli strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon since this war began. It's a lot. So beginning with the IDF officer's speech, this is Brigadier General Dan Goldfus, the commander of the 98th Division, yesterday during a press conference on the Gaza border. He said, quote, "I ask at this opportunity to address our leaders from both sides, and I hope that they will have the time to listen to the heart of a soldier. Since October 7th, I have not stopped fighting. Since then, I have not stopped sending soldiers into the fire and going in with them. We are fighting. We are not getting tired. We are determined to win, determined to bring home the hostages directly or indirectly." There's a lot to this, and I think from the outside looking in, we're going to, and I have, missed some of the political aspects of this speech. There's a little bit of pushback inside of Israel just because of the political nature of this military officer, bringing up a few things that I'll get to here in a second. He said, quote, "Don't worry. We, the people of the military, the commanders and the troops, have taken, are taking, and will take responsibility for every action. We will not run. Just as we don't run from the fire, we will not run from responsibility. We bow our heads over the resonant failure on October 7th, but at the same time, we push forward, carry out operations at the highest level of quality, protect our values, and reach as many achievements on the battlefield." So there was some analysis that this was kind of a shot at Netanyahu and the Israeli leadership, who many believe have not taken responsibility for the failures on October 7th. So again, there's a bit of a challenge here from how we kind of interpret this externally versus how it's going to be interpreted inside of Israel. He says, quote, "But you need to be worthy of us. You need to be worthy of the soldiers who lost their lives. You need to be worthy of the reservists who don't care for what political side they are on and fought and fight alongside each other. You must make sure that we do not return to October 6th, that all of the effort and sacrifice won't be in vain, that you must keep well in your minds every day, every hour. From my heart, I ask of you to be together, united. Push away the extremism and adopt the togetherness. Find what unites. We on the battlefield found it, and we will not give up on it. Make it worth it." So again, I'd be interested in some comments from the Israelis that watch these videos and how this is interpreted domestically. It's easy, I think, on the outside to look in and say, hey, that sounds like a solid message of togetherness. Let's make sure we're on the same side fighting a common enemy and standing up for our soldiers, saying, look, the fighting men and women are out here taking it to the enemy forces every single day. Can you do the same back in the rear? However, it's always tricky. Anytime somebody in uniform, especially in a time of war, starts to make even slightly political statements, it can be taken in a lot of different directions and is not always well received. And there's a good reason for that. You really don't want, maybe a personal opinion here, but I believe that we really do not want a politicized military here in the United States. I believe that's the same feeling in Israel. Whether or not this crosses that line or how this plays out in that context, I'd have to leave up to the Israeli citizens. Now, there was a note earlier today that the chief of staff, the IDF chief of staff, had summoned Brigadier General Goldfus for a clarification conversation over these off-script remarks, you refer to them, that he gave during this press conference yesterday. Now, I've talked about this article before, but a couple months ago, Duke University ran a study where they were able to purchase location, health, and financial data of active and former military members for as little as 12 cents per record. And what might these buyers want their data for? Nobody knows because they don't necessarily ask. They found out in this study that if they paid with a wire instead of a credit card, they could skip the customer verification process, as in save us a little bit of money, and we won't ask any questions about why you need the sensitive data of American service members. For less than a quarter per record, anyone can purchase very sensitive and personal information. Now, the tool that I use to help with this is called Delete Me. They monitor data broker sites, and whenever my personal data shows up, they get it removed. The challenge here is that this isn't a one-time thing. So with the Delete Me subscription, they're constantly scanning the web, and whenever something new pops up, it's quickly removed. So here's a quick look at my most recent report. Delete Me reviewed over 4,600 listings, removed 18 of them across 15 different data brokers that included 70 total pieces of personally identifiable information. Now here's a look at the various data broker sites. There's a lot of them that had my information that Delete Me then had removed. So check out the link in the description to start protecting yourself and your family with Delete Me and use code Preston for 20% off all consumer plans. Then earlier this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech to the AIPAC conference, which stands for American Israel Public Affairs Committee, where he laid out the current status of the war and where he expects it to go from here. He said, quote, "Let me be clear. Israel will win this war no matter what. In order to win this war, we must destroy the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah. Otherwise, Hamas will organize, arm, and retake Gaza, and then we'll be back to square one." Now, Rafah, in the southern portion of the Gaza Strip, is a sticking point right now between Israel, the United States, and really countries all around the world. The reason for that is Rafah is kind of the last area in the Strip that the IDF has yet to fully operate. There have not been major clearance operations through Rafah. The way that the ground war has played out is that Israel, by and large, started in the north and moved south. So as they moved into the northern portion of the Gaza Strip, the civilians moved south. Then Israel moved into the central portion of the Gaza Strip, and the civilians moved south. Then they moved into Khan Yunis, the southern portion of the Gaza Strip, and the civilians moved the only place they could go, down to Rafah, in the southernmost tip of the Gaza Strip. So the majority of the civilians in Gaza right now are huddled around Rafah. At the same time, the same has been true of Hamas. As Israel has moved through the north, central, and southern portions of Gaza, they have killed or eliminated or captured Hamas militants and leaders. The remaining Hamas figures have also moved south. So Israel's in this, rock and a hard place. Rafah is full of civilians. It's also likely the last remaining holdouts for Hamas. That's why you're going to continue to hear a lot about when and if Israel will move into Rafah. He says, quote, "We will finish the mission in Rafah, and at the same time, we will allow the civilian population to leave the danger zone. We've taken measures to minimize harm to civilians that no other army has taken throughout history." There's been a lot of conversation about this recently. A friend of mine, John Spencer, very well respected, very knowledgeable on urban warfare, has written a couple of pieces talking about how Israel is kind of the gold standard and has done more in this war to protect civilian lives than any other military throughout history. I disagree a little bit with that. There was an article I came across recently that I'll link in the description below. I think it's worth reading. It's long, but what they get at, and I tend to agree with this view, is it's not just that are you doing things like the roof knocks, for instance. That is a thing that very few countries around the world do. I don't think we ever did that in the United States. The concept of dropping a small munition on the top of a building to tell the residents, we're going to hit this structure, get out, everybody can evacuate before the actual strike takes place. Israel has done that, especially at the beginning of the war in Gaza here. The challenge is when there's bombs dropping everywhere all the time, the airstrikes are so substantial happening all across the Gaza Strip, where do you go? And how do you know that that roof knock was actually on your building? What if it was the building next to you and you leave your building and go into that one and that's the one that's going to get hit? So what that whole article was getting at is Israel is taking a lot of steps to prevent civilian casualties, but we have to reassess and understand, are those working in the current environment? I think that's still up for debate. Will continue to be a debate as the war rages on. He continues by saying, "To our friends in the international community, I say, you cannot say that you support Israel's right to exist and defend itself and then oppose Israel when it exercises this right. You cannot say that you support Israel's goal of destroying Hamas and then oppose Israel when it takes necessary actions to achieve that goal. You cannot say that you oppose Hamas's strategy of using civilians as human shields and then accuse Israel of civilian casualties that are the result of the same cynical strategy of Hamas." So a couple big picture thoughts here. First off, I've said before, I believe that countries, states act in their own self-interest. So what you're seeing here is Netanyahu, at least the Israeli leadership, believes that the ends justify the means in Gaza. They believe that the way that they are carrying out the war in Gaza is the best way to ensure the long-term stability and security of Israel and the Israeli people. I understand that. Putting myself in their shoes, I would hate it if some country around the world was trying to dictate to me and my country's leadership how we should best protect ourselves from a threat that we are facing that they are not. That'd be a tough pill to swallow. Completely understandable. So that whole Israel acting in Israel's own self-interest is what we've seen and probably what we're going to continue to see. And it's understandable. Now, the counterpoint to that is a country cannot act in their own self-interest if that self-interest violates the international rule of law. So, for instance, if the International Court of Justice comes back and says that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, then it's no longer a matter of the international community standing by and saying, well, Israel's going to do what Israel's going to do. At that point, it becomes an obligation on countries around the world, including the United States, to step in, intervene, and stop what the ICJ at that point hypothetically would have deemed a violation of the international rule of law. Then the last thing I want to bring up here is I understand how Israel gets so defensive when countries from around the world levy criticism on how they're carrying out this war in Gaza. I get it. It makes sense. I wouldn't want to hear that either. But if I can look at a comparison with the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, which there's a lot of differences between that and Gaza. There's also a lot of similarities, big picture. At the time of that invasion, the United States got a lot of our allies on board. At the very least, the majority of them just let it happen, if not outright supported us with troops on the ground, aircraft overhead. There were dissenting voices, both internationally as well as domestically here in the United States, but they didn't win the day. However, now, as history looking back, I think it's safe to say that those dissenting voices should have gotten more attention. Had we listened to those, the valid criticisms of why an invasion of Iraq was not a good idea, that would have saved us a ton of lives, a lot of money, and the Middle East would look very, very different today. So it's just something to keep in mind whenever you hear criticism of Israeli strategy in this war. I understand that some of that criticism is made in bad faith, but I think some is also made in good faith, and it's probably worth listening to all of that and at least taking in varying points of view. Then earlier this week, the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence put out their 2024 threat assessment with a couple aspects here related to the ongoing war in Gaza. They said, we assessed that Iranian leaders did not orchestrate nor had foreknowledge of the Hamas attack against Israel, which has kind of been the standard thought process for a while now. In the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was a lot of speculation that Iran helped to plan and coordinate and maybe even gave the green light for October 7th. But as more and more information came out, it really looked like while Iran, is directly responsible for arming, equipping, and training much of Hamas, the idea that they kind of gave the green light and helped to plan and execute this operation, the evidence just isn't really there. They said Israel probably will face lingering armed resistance from Hamas for years to come, and the military will struggle to neutralize Hamas's underground infrastructure, which allows insurgents to hide, regain strength, and surprise Israeli forces. I haven't heard that officially stated from anyone in the U.S. quite yet. That's a big statement if you think about it. That's saying this war against Hamas is not going to be over soon. This is years of an insurgency, of a counterinsurgency that Israel will be fighting. They say Netanyahu's viability as leader, as well as his governing coalition of far-right and ultra-Orthodox parties that pursued hardline policies on Palestinian security issues, may be in jeopardy. Distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened across the public from its already high levels before the war, and we expect large protests demanding his resignation and new elections. A different, more moderate government is a possibility. That's a pretty significant statement. This is coming from the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It's not coming from the State Department or the White House or Congress, but, it's still a major U.S. government official putting out that they think Netanyahu's government is probably on the way out. Then turning up north, the IDF put out some estimates the other day talking about the number of Hezbollah targets they've struck in southern Lebanon since the war began. They say, according to IDF estimates, more than 300 Hezbollah operatives have been killed, including 5 senior commanders, and another 750 have been wounded by Israel's strikes. This is largely backed up by Hezbollah Telegram channels, their media outlets, when they announced the death of these individuals. The last I saw was right about 300, so that number actually kind of checks out. They say over the past 5 months, the Northern Command has led strikes from the air against more than 1,200 targets and another 3,100 sites from the ground using artillery and tanks. That's over 4,300 targets struck in southern Lebanon just in the past 5 months. That's significant. Again, it's not a full-scale war, but this fighting is happening every single day, and there are people being wounded or killed every single day on that northern front. Israel says the targets include weapons depots, buildings used by Hezbollah for attacks, more than 150 observation posts along the border, some 70 command center where terror operatives were gathered, more than 50 significant rocket launching positions, and dozens of squads carrying out anti-tank missile attacks. They say more than 450 sites belonging to Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, which is believed by Israel to be tasked with potentially infiltrating into Israel, were also hit. That's a lot. And that Radwan force is very combat hardened at this point. They spend a lot of time rotating troops in and out of Syria. This is a unit with a lot of combat experience. And then the IDF said that their intense strikes against Hezbollah are causing damage to the terror group's air and ground capabilities, as well as its top command. There have been a handful of senior leaders taken out. The majority of those so far killed are lower level militants, right? Frontline soldiers, not necessarily leadership figures. but there have been a few. And again, the war in the northern front isn't really slowing down anytime soon. Fortunately, it hasn't escalated, but the daily tit for tat, Hezbollah strikes into Israeli territory, Israel striking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, really hasn't slowed down at all since October 8th. But that's all we got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, linked in the description below. Substack's kind of a mix between a website and a newsletter. You can get these articles emailed directly to you when they come out on subjects like China using little blue men in the Pacific. We've talked about Hezbollah's war chest in the past and kind of the illicit activities they use to fund their military and a bunch of other stuff. I think it's interesting. It's all free and linked in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.